Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 59 of the Watch Rolling Podcast. The Watch Rolling Podcast is a veteran-owned podcast that focuses on helping newer watch enthusiasts learn from my mistakes while bringing valuable veteran resources to the attention of the watch enthusiast community. My name is Jason. I'm your host. If you're new to the pod, welcome. If you're turning, welcome back. This week, I discussed the ACP, our American Corporate Partners Mentorship Program, with a career naval officer, Christopher Jason, who used the program, and we're also going to discuss his transition from the military to civilian life. And he has a bunch of nuggets that are great, and I think you're going to take a lot from it. This podcast is brought to you by the AWWC, the Anti-Watch Watch Club. They are a 501c3 charitable nonprofit organization. They focus on veteran, law enforcement, and first responder charitable donations, and they utilize a drop style culture, which is like, I've showed you before, Nalgene bottles, t-shirts, all that stuff. It's awesome. And then they provide monetary, social, humanitarian, and emotional support to those in need. But let's not waste any time. I want to get in here and have Chris. And here he is.
Hello,
hey,
Jason.
Chris, how you doing? Hey,
I'm doing
good.
great.
How are you?
All right, I'm ready to go. Let's talk.
Awesome. Yeah, Chris. So I gave everybody a brief intro. I let them know you're a career naval officer, but I always feel it's best when people get to tell their own story. So by all means, let us know a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Yeah, so I did 25 years in the Navy. I was a naval flight officer, so I always use Goose from Top Gun as my example. My aircraft are, I actually got to figure out that, there they are. Mostly Prowler EA-6B, and then a little bit at the end of my career, I got to fly in the EA-18G, but side seat or back seat, so not the pilot, but the weapons guy for electronic warfare missions. It was my dream as a kid to do that. I can't believe I got to do it. I can't believe it's over. So 25 years later, that was last July, I left Corpus Christi, my last tour, and started my journey here to Florida and transition. It was I use the word brutal to describe my transition process. And I had what I thought was a successful career, squadron command, base command, and just really good, successful tours. And yet I found myself, really struggling to put it all together. A lot of pressure and just some really downtime. So I'm really excited to share what I learned with other people to make the experience just a little bit less rough for somebody else. That's my goal.
Oh yeah. No, I appreciate it too, Chris, because I know it's believe me, it happens more than often, and it's something I think that, first of all, I appreciate you coming on to talk about it, because it kind of, I know for a fact, when you talk about it, it can bring up some not so great times, you know what I mean? And
yeah, for
it's
sure.
kind of I always joked around that the first time I left my first ship, I lived on, back in the day, I'm enlisted, we lived on the ship. You had to get permission to live off the ship. And I went to my first shore duty. And I remember when I walked away, I was a little scared. I was like, oh man, like this has been my home. And I felt the same exact way when I retired. When I retired and I wore the uniform the last day, and the next day I woke up, I was like, oh, this is serious. And so,
yeah, I felt excited. I was burned out in a way, and
yeah.
I was excited about being a civilian. Right, I wasn't looking back like, oh, I miss my brothers, and that would come later. But initially, I was just like, this is great. I'm free, and let's explore life. But then just the pressure, with a wife and two kids, and how am I going to provide? Where are we going to go? All that. But we'll definitely get into all that. I'm sure. I'm excited to talk about it.
Oh yeah, and so I mentioned in the introduction that we're going to discuss American Corporate Partners, ACP, and for anyone that's not familiar with that, we're going to talk about them a little bit. But you can go back to my episode 53, and I discuss one of their mentoring program events that they had previously. So you can find that episode on anywhere you can find podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the whole thing. But let's get in the interview, Chris, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff. You can bring up any of the ACP centric stuff you want to whenever you want to. We have a series of questions, and I think the first question is because I think there's a lot of stuff out there, right? And we always talk about, we call them deck plate lawyers or whatever. But what's the one thing your transition taught you that you didn't expect?
The biggest shock I had, and this is a heck of a way to start our interview, but I'm going to go right to it. Was I actually encountered some really strong bias from other veterans, which I didn't expect, right? You kind of feel like, and for most of my transition, other veterans were the key. Like that's how I got the job I have. That's how I got the next job I'm about to start. And they were the most decisive and helpful. But there were times where I talk to veterans who had a very clear picture of community bias, like aviation versus armor versus ships versus whatever, service bias or rank bias. So I heard things like, I'd never hire an O6 because they don't know how to work. I'd never hire an officer because they don't do shit, was the quote.
Mm-hmm.
And aviators are arrogant, so I wouldn't, and so like when you're reaching out to someone who, you got in contact with from another veteran that said, hey, you should talk to this. And then you end up with a hiring manager discussion for a prospective job. And then they drop that bomb on you that they don't like the fact that you flew airplanes or that you were too senior in rank or too junior in rank. Yeah. It's really shocking. And it sets you back because you feel like the veteran community is the comfortable place. Yeah. But it can also be kind of a bad place. And then I was kind of put into a position where, and my friends were all divided on it. I said, hey, do I, pursue the job anyway and prove this person wrong? Or do I say, move on because you don't want to start a new job at a disadvantage where the person that's hiring you is already expecting, is already have a bias against you. And I went that route. I was like, I'm not going to go in an environment where someone's going to automatically second guess me because of the rank I had or the community I served in. So I passed. And there were companies I was very interested in, and I really thought they'd be really cool to work for. I was very disappointed to have to walk away. But that was my, like, in a million years, I never would have expected to encounter that. And really, I thought, like, okay, it's one thing if I guess a veteran has it. We all have it, right? We all think like special forces and SEALs, and we have a vision of what that is. And if someone says they were an infantryman, I think I know what that means. And they say a Marine or whatever. But to be on an interview and tell someone, well, I think because you're in this category, you won't do shit, is really a weird thing, right? And so I guess the candor of those veterans is like, if you think it, don't say it, But I mean, maybe I guess I'm grateful they were honest, but it was just it was very discouraging.
Well, it sounds like a place you probably wouldn't want to work anyways.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how I left it.
I experienced some similar stuff like that too, where I've had people tell me, because a lot of the job was writing, and one company told me, well, our experience is most enlisted people don't know how to write. I was like, what? Like, are you serious? Like, but I took that as a little sign, like, okay, I don't need to work there, and I went to another company. But yeah, man, that's unfortunate. But have you talked to anyone else that's experienced that? Like, did any of the mentors that you had through ACP, had any of them had similar stories? And if so, was there anything they discussed with you about how to kind of go around that, or were those the two options that
No, I mean, those are I didn't actually take. I mean, I remember venting to my ACP mentor about it, but she does not come from a military background at all. So that's why she was so effective, is because she worked for AIG. She was the one. So basically, you let them know a little bit about yourself and your interests, and then the ACP will pair you with a mentor. Oh, wow. And they realized that I was kind of looking very broadly, and I didn't know specifically, do I want to go into this or that? And so they're like, okay, well, she's got experience in various facets of the corporate world, but all corporate. I think she had been involved in marketing and involved in some different operations, and she had different experience, and so that's why we were paired together. And it was funny because the first time we interacted, she was very direct and in a kind of a Northeast Philly kind of way, where my wife's from, and I was taken aback, like she was just immediately was just like, hey, I think this part of your resume stinks or whatever. And I was like, whoa, I wasn't used to that, but I was like, you know what, I'm just I have to have a thick skin, let's give her a chance. And she just turned out to be awesome, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that she did.
That's great. Well, it's nice to get a different opinion because let's be honest about it. I mean, we've discussed it, as a captain or as a chief, sometimes you stop hearing a lot of constructive criticism in a very forceful way, right? People tend to like kind of skirt around you and like, hey, maybe, like lieutenants become very deft at being like, hey, sir, like, or like for a second class is like, hey, chief, blah, blah, blah. So it's interesting because I've dealt with that too when I got more in the civilian world, where based on someone's background and what they did, they just give you like both barrels, but they mean it in a constructive manner. But it's not like they cut through all the lines of BS that we're probably used to from being in the military. So that's pretty nice.
Yep, exactly.
So another question I had was, what's a common myth fed to you by specifically, I think, fellow active duty or vets about your transition from the military to civilian sector. And was it a myth that turned out to be true, or one that was total
It
junk?
was so total junk and dangerous.
Oh,
Is you'll have no problem finding a job. So they're like, oh, with your record, oh, you'll have no trouble. People will be falling over to hire you. And so I had set out initially, said I want to try to get a total break from defense and do something very different. That's kind of was my going in thing. So like let's search outside of defense, because that's sort of like the natural step. And I wanted to see like how far away can I go from the tree there and like find something new and different and exciting. And I found that to be really hard. And so eventually I said, okay, these veterans that said you'll have no trouble, they must have been talking about defense aerospace, like the natural fit, right? Oh, you flew airplanes for the Navy, you did electronic warfare. Why don't you help us sell electronic warfare pods? That kind of thing. But even that was super difficult. It was just a lot of disappointments, a lot of, oh yeah, you're perfect for this. And then, 5 interviews later, oh, but you don't have enough of this experience. And, and then it falls dead, So part of it is the algorithms. You can't really like I had what you'd call an operational career. So like I didn't specialize, some folks can go into like IT or cyber, like my brother-in-law did that. So he specialized in something very technical and very in demand, where I just continued to just fly airplanes at a higher level. And but at the end of the day, like when you go out to the civilian world, like we're really impressed that you commanded a squadron and a base, but where's your technical experience? I didn't have it. And so when you try to upload that resume into an algorithm that's, for example, I was really interested in space and thought, Blue Origin and SpaceX and all these guys, but you look at the job descriptions and they want, 4 to 8 years of experience working on spacecraft. Like I don't have it. And so it was just a lot of dead ends because I had done all this stuff, and it was stuff where I thought, okay, well, look, I did really well though, like I commanded a squadron. We were the tactical squadron of the year. I commanded a base. We got the naval installation of the year. Like that's got to mean something. But the thing is that it means something to someone after you have a conversation, but it doesn't mean anything to an algorithm. Yeah. And then even when you talk to someone face to face, they're like, okay, great. Like you're an achiever and you do great things, but I really need someone that had, in my case, it was either business that I was missing, acquisitions that I was missing, which is, in the Navy, I would have gotten that in the test community if I'd gone to test pilot school and gone that route. So I didn't have that. I didn't have engineering experience. I didn't have, so it was just a purely operational career, successful, but was not the only people I was really getting traction with were people in electronic warfare, because that's what my aircraft did. So it's very, very narrow. And even then I had great interviews and, got turned down for a job with L3 Harris for just that, because the other candidate had that acquisitions experience, programmatic. So I think, and the thing is that when you build the expectation that it's going to be easy to find a job, when you start failing at finding the job, you just feel it just shatters you as a person with your self-esteem, because you're like, well, all these people told me it'd be easy. What am I doing wrong? What am I missing? So I think that's a very destructive thing for people to be told. And I think it should be, hey, finding job is difficult, and be prepared. It's tough. Just say that,
Yeah. Especially like the additional nugget on top of finding a job that you really want to do, something that you really want to do, and something that'll make you have a sense of, like you said, you always wanted to be a naval flight officer. That's what you wanted to do since you were young. Exactly. So it makes the cruddy parts of your job easy, right? The late nights, the lack of sleep, the cruddy food, or like any kind of near mishap or something like that. It's easy to, I'm not saying bury it, but it's easy to deal with it, because this is something you always want to do, and it's part and parcel for it. And then all of a sudden, you get out and you're trying to find this job, and then you're left with, if you're lucky enough to find one, it's a job that you just said it, to paraphrase, is like, well, they want someone that's going to sit at this keyboard and do this very specific thing, and you can't even get that job because they think what they're saying is that you're overqualified, but they don't say it in a nice way of like, you're overqualified for this job. You know what I mean? And you end up just not getting the job, and then you feel kind of cruddy about it, which I've been there, believe me.
And I was set. I really wanted, I'm kind of jumping into, I think, of another the questions, but it's perfect timing because all the veterans I talked to, like 99% of the veteran conversations that I was paired up with, hey, you should talk to so and so. They would always say, "What do you want to do?" And I didn't have an answer for that. What I wanted to ask them was, look, I need your help figuring that out. I have this resume, I have this career experience, and I don't know what I could do with it. I don't know what I could be good at. I know that I could, sell electronic warfare components for a defense contractor. That is a natural fit for people like me. But what else is out there? What else could I do? And I really couldn't get an answer. I just kept getting, well, what do you want to do? Like, I don't know. I need help figuring that out. And we would just be stuck at that question. Because I couldn't say like, well, I want to, they're like, well, have you thought about Amazon? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Basically they kept going back to the companies that hire veterans. I wish I'd done the Commit Foundation. That's another resource, but I was too late. They need a year to help you figure out what like your purpose is. And I didn't get a chance to do that. But so I had to kind of figure that out on my own. And it took me a while, but I ended up with an answer that wasn't what the veterans I talked to kind of expected. Is I wasn't able to go, I want to do this specific thing. And what I realized is I want to be part of a mission. I want to be part of a team. I want to have that rewarding, passionate job. And the thread that I found is the jobs that excited me were all had that in common. Like one of them was a company that operates drones in Africa to deliver medicine to remote villages. Oh, nice. I thought that was fantastic, right? And so like my eyes lit up. And then another one was a nonprofit that recovers remains of MIAs from the Pacific.
Oh,
and so
is that Project Recover?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool program.
So all of that was like, okay, I realize I don't want to just sit at a computer and sell missiles, and be a business guy.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that I want to try to capture the mission sense of being in a squadron and find a mission to be a part of. And it wasn't specific to the product. It wasn't specific to the sector, the industry. It was just about finding a purpose and feeling like I was doing something important. But it was just surprising to me that I just kept getting, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. And people were struggling to help me figure that out. And I was struggling because they couldn't help me figure it out. And it just took a lot of work to get there. Yeah. And I had actually, I was really into space as a kid and everything. I was a physics major and took all the space classes and everything. But I had essentially given up on that. Even though I came to the Space Coast, I kind of gave up on that, thinking, yeah, all these resumes want the 4 to 8 years of experience hands-on with spacecraft that I don't have. But then a veteran helped me exactly connect to a space role.
Oh, nice.
And so again, that is a connection, like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, oh my God, are you kidding? That's a thing. And what I ended up doing was getting a role in space through Department of Defense support to NASA. So because I'm career DoD guy, I was a good fit for that role. And then that became a bridge to then leave DoD and work directly for NASA, which I'm going to do as a NASA contractor in 2 weeks.
Nice.
So
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I really can't believe it. It's awesome. I interviewed people that did care about my experience. They were particularly, I think, focused on the fact that I was a carrier air boss and that they needed that kind of operational leadership. But the point that I was trying to make there is that as someone that wanted something outside of defense, I had to make a step towards it, still connected to defense, and then was able to transition from defense to NASA.
Yeah.
So sometimes you may have to do an interim step, or two to get where you want to be. Sorry, I was a little bit.
Oh, no, by all means. I mean, it to me, Chris, it all matters, because I think a lot of times too is, I try not to make generalizations, but I feel like a lot of times, like if we have any viewers that are going to watch this that aren't in the military, I feel like a lot of times we get painted with a broad brush, and like we're machines, we're automatons, and we don't, and it couldn't be anything, further from the truth. I mean, you have Marines who play guitars and write poetry, and you have, sailors who, figure out complex engineering problems, and they're an E3, but they had a weird childhood growing up and they just never had the opportunity. And sometimes It takes a leader in a leadership position to see that. That's why we have stuff like old enlisted commissioning program and state 21. I mean, like you were a captain, maybe you saw potential in an E5 or something. You sit down and talk with them like, hey, I really think you can get a commission. I think you could do great things in the Navy. It takes people, right? And that's part of what you just talked about, is like you finally ran across some people. You had to take a right turn, probably where you maybe want to take a left turn. And then somebody in a leadership position saw that potential and was like, hey, and now it's taking your route to where you're actually going to go do something that you're super excited about. And I'm a firm believer in that excitement with the ability to actually perform is going to pay dividends that you can't really quantify, because that's the big thing that you mentioned that I think I like to know about is, and I think our viewers would like to know about is, you talked about mission. You talked about how you wanted to be part of something that was a mission like you were once before. Did you find in your job hunting progress or process, what, like a rough percentage, what was the percentage of companies that actually had a true mission and not a mission that is making money?
Oh boy.
And you can just ballpark it. Like it's not, has not to be like 8% or something, but I was just wondering because you hear a lot about
10,
stuff like that.
10,
Okay.
15% of the companies that I was looking at, that drone company was one of them. And
Yeah.
they're all for profit. I mean, they're not gonna save the world if they don't have a profit,
Exactly.
I get that. But and I tended to really focus in on those because they seem the most exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think it's something that it's interesting to hear. I've talked to enough veterans to know, especially that's a big hole, is like, especially if you have good leadership early on and they teach you what the overall arching point is, right? Like the reason why I used to tell my guys, like, there's a reason why you're doing this fire station maintenance. We have to be 100% in order to allow the other engineering people to drill. If we're not 100%, if we don't meet minimum equipment, they're not going to be able to demonstrate that they know how to actually operate this plant. So we have an obligation to the rest of our department and the rest of the ship, so we can actually take the ship from point A to point B and show that we know how to, blow up stuff and everything. It's like a series of process. And I always found that when you explained it to the newer personnel and the junior personnel, they had a sense of worth and a sense of belonging to the team. They understood why what they might normally think is what's the word, monotonous or mundane. There's actually a point to it, and they're part of the team and they have a goal. So towards the mission. So I don't know. I think that's interesting that you brought it up too, because there is a difference in. I don't think people would realize that about a senior officer, that you still have that, and I think it's important for people to know that, regardless of pay grade, you have to want to. Most of us still want to be involved in some kind of mission somewhere, and it's nice to know that in your experience that there wasn't a whole lot of companies that had an actual mission other than making a profit, which isn't a bad thing, but it could be kind of, I see, like disheartening or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So far, like the stuff we've talked about, like what would you say was your biggest challenge in your transition, and then the biggest lesson you took from that challenge?
So I finished my tour. Last tour was in Corpus Christi, Texas, and we knew we weren't going to stay there. But so having your last tour in a location where you're not retiring was really difficult. People say try to get orders to your place, your home, near your home of record, so that you can network and find jobs. Well, I didn't get to do that. I was building relationships and networks in a city where I wasn't going to work. And we were looking at Florida and Texas based on family and taxes and VA benefits and all that. It just kind of settled down to those were the best locations. But ultimately, like, I had to find a job somewhere else, and so that was really difficult because I just like, where do we start? And I had this promising interview with L3 Harris. It didn't pan out eventually, but it got me interested in the East Coast of Florida, which was not on my radar at all, and saw all the aerospace here, both NASA, Space Force, and L3 Northrop Grumman. Was very target rich for jobs, and was just ideal for the family as far as my son, who's a sailor, the other one plays tennis, and my wife wanted beach and surfing and all. I mean, it was the cost of living was still affordable. It wasn't as congested as Tampa, where I grew up on that coast. But we got closer and closer to my retirement date. I didn't have a job, so we had to commit to putting our stuff in storage. Like,
Mm.
what are we going to do? So my wife found a 6 month or 5 month lease on a furnished apartment in Satellite Beach out here near Melbourne,
Oh,
and we
nice.
just went for it. But I mean, we got in the car and drove and showed up to the city I'd never been to before,
Yeah.
and then the clock started because the owners of the place we were living in, the furnished condo, were going to come for Thanksgiving to their own condo, so we had to drop dead. And I knew that I couldn't get a house until I had a paycheck, because I had to get a pay stub in order to qualify for a mortgage. And so, just watching time slip through my fingers as I'm having these interviews and getting denied for one reason or another. And it was frustrating because, with Northrop Grumman, I had a successful interview, and they're like, okay, next phase is 2 weeks from now, and suddenly, like, I just have to wait 2 weeks just because someone's on travel in the company, and that's when they can reconvene the next interview phase. Like, it was really agonizing to watch the time slip away. We arrived in July and suddenly it's September, and I realized if I don't get an offer soon that I can take to the mortgage company, that then start looking for a house to then close, which takes 60 days.
Yeah.
And then I have to book the arrival of my furniture so I can live in the house, and then I can move out of the furnished rental. I only made that timeline work by 2 weeks. So I had 2 weeks of cushion, or I would have ended up,
Yeah.
God knows where. And the feeling, I mean, I still feel it when I think about it, the pressure that I had to, my kids would ask me, hey, did you find a job yet? And it's just like the whole weight of your family is on your
Yeah.
shoulders. And it was brutal. My sister-in-law remarked to my wife's like, because they retired out of their last tour they got their last tour in the Army in the city they wanted to retire in, which was Austin, Texas. And so he was able to network and build relationships and meet people for the two years of his last tour, which she said, I can't imagine doing a retirement and moving and finding a job and buying a house. Like, you just took all these huge stress balls and combined them into one giant stress
Mhm.
event. And it was brutal. So that's what made it really challenging. Where are we going to live? Where am I going to work? How do I get a house? And having to
Yeah.
figure all that out at the same time. It
It's
was rough.
I can't even imagine. I mean, I pretty much retired by myself, and that was still pretty rough. And so having all the other stuff. So what do you? I mean, so Chris, like, all that stuff going on. What do you think helped get you through that? Like, personal, and then I would say maybe external, like, immediate family or external family, or mentors or something like that, or a couple of key components that you helped feel got you through that rough time.
It was really all other veterans. Just, I had one she's a professional coach. She was in my squadron, my first tour. And she helped me when I had to decide, do I stay in the Navy or get out at like the 8-year mark? I was really agonizing over it because I had just done a real long deployment and, family and everything, and thinking, do I really want to keep doing this? And she helped me cut to it, it really was helpful. So I went back to her and just asked for her help. Her name's Jen Campbell. And just to be able to, I remember having one conversation with a veteran that went kind of south. I was just really frustrated and really probably at my lowest point. And I think he asked the same question that maybe a couple other previous, well, what do you want to do? And I think I had just sort of like, I don't know. He ended up just not liking my tone or something and just getting angry with me. And then I got so frustrated. I just kind of went to her, I mean, as close to tears as I could be, I guess, and was just really frustrated. I was like, and she's like, calm down, take it. So she was just there to help me kind of
Yeah.
slow things down a little bit. So she really helped out. Another guy, Daniel Schnick, I'd never met him before, but we met through a classmate of mine from the academy that I had. Hey, I reached out on LinkedIn, hey, or Facebook or something, like, hey, classmates in Tampa area, can you guys help? And she connected me with him, and he was amazing. Like, he would just always have ideas and reach out and like, hey, and he probably put me in touch with 12 or 15 different people just to say, hey, Chris, meet so-and-so. They work at this, place. Hey, so-and-so, meet Chris. He's retiring from the Navy. Go. And just opened a lot of doors, had a lot of conversations.
Yeah.
and he was just so relentless. And I was like, wow, this guy's putting in so much effort in me that really helped me to feel better about it all. And but
Force
it was
multipliers. That's what we call them out there. They're
it
force
really
multipliers
was,
out there.
yeah. And it was a guy who was air boss behind me, two air bosses behind me on the Roosevelt, that was like, hey, do you know Greg? He's he lives in your town, and he flew our aircraft, and he does astronaut rescue for DoD, for NASA. I was like, he does what? Yeah, I think they're hiring. And that I reached out to Greg, and that's how that was the first job that I got. So really it was just talking to veterans nonstop, it was proved super helpful. And in some of them I had never met. The current job I got, a recruiter from Jacobs, they're the primary contract for NASA, had reached out to me for a job that I wasn't qualified for, but we talked, and I was like, okay. So I just used LinkedIn. I looked up Jacobs, and then there's a people function on it where you can it'll tell you, like, these are people you're connected to that work there, or also people who used to work in the Navy that currently work there, or you can search by city. You can fill people who went to your school, and so you can find someone that has something in common with you, right? So I found a guy who was a naval aviator test pilot, and reached out to him and said, hey, and really all I wanted to know is, like, I didn't go to test pilot school. I know that that's what NASA likes. With my resume, do I have a prayer of ever working for the dream team? And he's like, actually you do. And let me, hold on a second. And he passed my resume to his to his boss and his boss's boss. And they're like, hey, we have a job fair next week. You should go and meet Ron. And I went and met Ron, and then, I got an offer.
Awesome.
And so again, he and the funny thing is, when I first cold called him on LinkedIn, he's like, well, I'm not sure how helpful I can be, but I'll tell you what I know. And it turned out that he's been decisive in the dream coming true. So he was super helpful. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think I would hesitate to see where I'd have ended up, were it not for the help of other veterans who took an interest in me. And I met one guy for coffee, and we did research. He helped me do research on Northrop Grumman, because I was applying to them. He's like, here, look at this. This is what you want to study. These are the programs you should look at. And so I went into that interview and really did well, because he'd prepared me. Like, he took his time, met me for coffee, and we were there for like an hour. Like, to have other veterans do that, that's all I want to do, is give that kind of time back, because that was the decisive part of it.
That's awesome. Because I mean, and you can tell when a fellow veteran really cares about, they care about the mission too, right? So they want to bring in good people, qualified people that want to make a difference. And it's always, I mean, you never, I told you my story, like, there was just a 5-minute interaction with a guy I was stationed with, whose wife needed a person in a certain specific role with the ability to write. And that chance meeting steamrolled everything. I mean, it just started everything off on a path, and it's crazy what our veteran network can do for us if we just reach out and take a chance. And then once you get in the position to take a chance on someone else too, pay it back.
The network works in strange ways, because when I was applying for interested in this job, the one I'm in now, the DoD astronaut rescue, I had applied for it, and I didn't think it was going anywhere. And then suddenly I got a call from my handler, the 04 LDO, basically running flight deck and hangar bay, and the air department boss to the air boss, right? Yeah. And he's like, hey, this guy reached out about an astronaut job, and he asked me. Apparently they knew each other, and he was able to say what kind of person I was, and that helped me get the job as well.
Nice.
And so sometimes, and I didn't learn about that till some of the other. Like, I think the guy that is my current coworker, he's like, oh yeah, we talked to so-and-so. I was like, wait, I know that guy from this. He's like, yeah, we talked to him too, because apparently he knows the guy. And so people are able to look you up on LinkedIn. They looked me up on LinkedIn. They saw who I knew, and then they reached out to them because they knew them. And they're like, hey, we both know this guy. So sometimes, like, you took care of someone, or you did right by someone 10 years ago in the Navy, and then they remember that. So as long as you weren't a jerk to people in your service, there'll be someone that remembers you that maybe will be helpful behind
the true story. I know a guy, a retired senior chief, who basically is so good. It was so good a long time ago. Is good now. That if he recommends anyone, it's like 99 point. You'd have to come into the interview and like punch somebody in the face to not get hired. Like, his
Yeah.
word is so good. Um, well, so through all this stuff, Chris, that the transition and finally getting to the point to where you have something you're excited about doing. So what would you know everyone's an adult, but I think a lot of times we forget about personality traits, or maybe there's a trait or a strength or something that you found during this process that maybe you had never really thought about before that kind of came up and helped you. But was there anything personally you learned through this, and something that's a lesson you would take with you that maybe you hadn't thought about before?
Yeah, I learned to be patient. I told my wife when I started early. I started prepping for a transition a year out, and I was like, I will have a job lined up before we leave this tour. And I did not have that. I didn't have a job when we arrived in Florida, and I didn't have a job 2 months later. Um, you know, I thought if I work hard and I'm just aggressive, and don't give up and just push hard, like I will get the job. But just had to be patient because some of the
Yeah.
stuff just takes time. And what I came to appreciate is that there's a process that all the like wrong turns and the dead ends and all the and any conversation I had with someone, I was like, well, that guy was a jerk, or I can't believe he said that, or he wasn't helpful at all. What a waste, or whatever. Like every time I got frustrated and had a setback was really just like contributing to the process. It was,
Yeah.
it was giving me clarity. Like I never would have come to realize like mission is what I want, if I hadn't had some of those darker moments or those disappointments.
Mhm.
And so it's like, once I started to just sort of breathe and just say, look, like all of these negative little points that you're having along this journey are decisively important parts of the journey. You can't do it without those. You
Yeah.
wouldn't want to do it without those, and you're going to end up in the wrong place if you don't have those. So just take them as valuable and move on. Like you've got to have that, because you show up in an interview after you've had an interview with a jerk, and you're way more prepared. You're much more able
Yeah.
to sort of sniff out the culture, right? Like I started to feel like, wow, I'm really getting good at this, and it was not because of the good interviews I had. It was because of the disappointing ones, or the ones where I was like, I can't believe that guy just said that, or
Yeah.
but then you become wiser, and you're stronger. You're able to sort of smell that bad culture or whatever and stay away from it. And so that clarity, so I think that was the biggest. We're all type A, mission driven, like get it done, knife hand, shipmate, all that. And then suddenly like we have to slow down and say, you know what, I'm going to go to sleep tonight without a job, and I'm going to wake up tomorrow without a job. And it might be 2 more weeks, and I'm going to have to tell my kids, nope, sorry, your dad hasn't found a job yet,
Yeah.
and I'm just going to have to just fight through. And, I may want this one job that I'm applying to. I did that mistake first. Oh, this job's awesome. That's the one I want. Forget all the other ones. Just work on this one. And then you realize, oh, I didn't get the job. I just lost a lot of time.
Yeah.
Whereas you have to really keep all those going simultaneously, because
Yeah.
you can't, I didn't write this one down because it just came to me, but it was a hard lesson to learn. I'm not surprised that I didn't want to recall it, but the idea that the hiring folks are going to treat you like you're the greatest candidate they've ever seen,
Oh yeah.
because they're going to treat 6 other people that way. And I
Yeah.
didn't know that. Like I expected everyone to be very candid. And so when in this one job that I applied to, I thought, this is a lock. These people, they're telling me they love me. They love my record. They're telling me they want someone just like me. And then one of the 5 panel interviewers says, no, I want someone that has this and you don't have it. And suddenly you're like, what just happened?
Yeah.
And that was a job where I had sort of forsaken the search for 4 weeks, because this one was looking so great and it was a great fit, and I was just super happy. And all of a sudden, like I just wasted 4 weeks. And
Yeah.
so that's when I learned, like, you can't do that. And the thing is that they're going to hold their cards close to their chest. They're, you know what I mean? Like and I realize it's okay for us to do that. Like if I'm interviewing for 4 different companies and you're my number 4th choice, I'm not going to tell you that, right? Because
Yeah.
the other 3 companies don't work out, maybe that fourth is the one I'm going to take. And so just as I wouldn't tell them, well, you're actually my fourth choice, they're not going to tell me that, well, we got 3 better candidates than you, buddy. Right. We're all playing that
Yeah.
game. But I went into it with this because I always valued, like, transparency and communication and
Yeah.
being candid. But it's like this game doesn't work that way. And you sort of have to be your own best advocate and realize that they might tell you that they think you walk on water, but they've said that to 3 other
Yeah.
people. That was tough.
And there's something to be said too for, I always tell people you gotta take a look at whoever the hiring manager is too, right? Or the HR person. So let's just say 2 weeks ago, they really did get a great candidate. The candidate comes in for 2 weeks, and then on day 15 gets the offer they really wanted from another company, and walks in and says, "Hey, I appreciate everything. Here's my 2 weeks notice." I've seen
Yep.
that happen a million times in the contracting world, right? And then the
Yep.
hiring manager and the human resource people are like what, you know what I mean? So the next time they start to, I've heard this firsthand, that they start to look at people's resumes and they're like, "Hey man, this person's way overqualified for this job." And they'll have discussions like, "There's no way this is the only job they're applying for. And if we give this person this job, they're going to probably ghost us in like 2 or 3 weeks. They're going to have to start the
Mhm.
process all over." Like, I always joke about it. Like, there was a while there where I saw USPS people delivering mail in civilian clothes, right? And this was like about 6 or 7 years ago. And I asked one of the mail people, I said, "Do they let you guys like, and the lady told me, "No, I'm new. They won't give us a uniform until we pass our probationary period or something,"
Hmm.
because so many people were taking mail people jobs and then working for like a month and quitting. And then they wouldn't give the uniforms back, and the USPS spent all this money on uniforms. It was just, and I thought to myself, like, wow, that's a huge problem. So I think that's important for people that interview too, to remember, like, I mean, sometimes, they are doing exactly what you said, and sometimes they're just cutting their losses because they look at you and you might be too good, like literally
Well,
for the
yeah.
job.
Well, that's a good perspective. I didn't think of it that way, because I got told a couple of times, "Hey, you're overqualified. Why do you even want this job?" And I thought I explained it pretty well. It's like, I like your mission. I like what you're doing.
Yeah.
I want to do the job, and if I'm overqualified, then you'll want to advance me into other roles, and you'll like, well, let me give it a shot. Let me go.
Yeah.
But I never thought of it that way. That they're thinking, this guy ain't gonna stick around.
Yeah.
And so that actually makes a lot of sense,
It's
because
crazy. It's
it's
crazy
very
because,
weird to hear you're overqualified. It's like, can I do the job or not? I want to do the job. Let's go.
it's like, just, I want a paycheck. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy because a lot of people don't, I think it's not to add like undue stress to anybody, but I think people need to realize, like, you're literally, like, if your resume is a baseball and the job is the hole at the county fair, and you can sometimes, based on the job, make that ball just slightly too big, and every time you throw it, it's just bouncing off. Like, because it takes some humility sometimes to dumb down. If you really want a job, sometimes you have to dumb down your resume, right? Or be very specific for that. So, that's something I learned, like, hey, maybe I just leave this off or something, because people have said funny things to me about that too. But so do you think the patient part, Chris, would be the biggest piece of advice you give to someone starting the transition, or do you think it's different if you're starting before you actually transition from military to civilian life? Do you think the patience is more like towards the end, after, or do you think that applies across the board, like from the beginning till the end?
I think it applies from the beginning, because I had built in a lot of time.
Mm,
So I shouldn't have needed patience, and yet I still did,
okay.
because when I was looking for work well before my retirement date, like, I just wasn't in the window. So, you have to kind of wait to get closer to that retirement date for companies to actually start seriously talking to you. Because when
Mhm.
you tell them, like, "Hey, I'm 8 months out," they're like, "Okay, great, we'll chat with you," but it's not going to go anywhere. And so, like, everything happens like in its phases,
Mhm.
and you just can't rush it. So I think, I know that some people strike gold, right? I've talked to people, they're like, "Yeah, I met this guy at this thing, and boom, I had a
Yeah.
job." And it's like, hey, that if that happens for you, that's awesome. That's not the norm, and I think most of us will have to go through a lot of disappointments and some failures
Yeah.
and some bad interviews and all kinds of stuff. Maybe some interviews where we just screwed it up, or some interviews where the person interviewing us screwed it up, whatever. Like, and some near misses where like everything looked perfect and somehow it didn't work out, or you got the job offer but the pay was just not acceptable. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you have to walk away from those. And speaking of which, ACP was really helpful to me
Oh,
on one of the things that Elizabeth did is she may not have been an expert in everything, but she said, "Hey, if you want to talk about salary negotiation, I've got the person." And so I had a session with someone that worked HR, and she was very candid and helped me out to understand some of the laws behind salary, so that she took some of the myths behind it. Like,
yeah.
oh, you might want to do the same job for $100,000 less than someone else. She's like, there's legal protections about what but she helped me kind of shape. This is kind of the range, and this is how you're going to zero in on that range. And that was super
Well, that's
great.
awesome.
So yeah, that was really helpful. And the very last job I got was, I actually turned down 2 offers from them before I accepted the final,
Oh,
which
wow.
I was basically convinced that was it. Like after the second one, but I said I can't take a pay cut right now. I just can't do it. So I'm
Yeah.
going to have to pass. And they worked it out. So I guess
Yeah. It's an
that's
age old
something I
saying.
mentioned,
Yeah.
just because it's important to realize, like, if it's below your price, it's something you got to be prepared to walk.
Yeah. You have to have a line. You have to have a line in the
Yeah.
sand for yourself and for your family. I mean, especially that would be a great discussion for another day. But like when it comes to contracting, especially when you understand how they use your resume once you're part of the company,
Yeah.
because they're using that resume to score other stuff. They
Yeah.
just are. But that's another conversation for another time. So you talked about the mentor you had. You said Elizabeth.
Yes. Yep.
So Elizabeth, that's a good transition. Let's just get into that. So Elizabeth was your mentor in ACP, American Corporate Partners. Um, I was going to ask you like, who's been your most important mentor in your transition? I'm not inferring that it's Elizabeth, but um,
Oh, it
it,
was. It definitely
okay.
was.
If
Yeah.
she was, well, let's talk a little bit about Elizabeth, what she did, and then when you get ready to talk about ACP and what they do, I'll pull up the screen so people that are watching can see it. But yeah, just let's talk about ACP and Elizabeth and how it all kind of started out.
Yeah. I consider them the blocking and tackling of transition is probably the best
Nice.
thing. Um, she's the one that I mentioned. Like, she was very direct the very first time. My email, when it comes up like as like on your screen, if I send you an email,
Mhm.
was just kind of weird. And she's like, "Hey, this reads like this. It doesn't. You need to change it." It's like, oh, but I did change it, and she was
Yeah.
absolutely right. But she started off nice and paced. She started off with, "Okay, let's work on your resume."
Yep.
I had built a resume off of my fit reps, my Navy evaluations, kind of
Mhm.
looking through each tour, did it chronologically, and so and then someone said, "Hey, you can't have all these military terms, and you have to dumb it down." That's what the advice I got. So I created a resume that would work if you had been a Navy veteran yourself and used all the lingo, or somewhat. And then I had one that was like super stripped down, like if you've never heard of the military, you'd understand it.
Yeah.
And I sent them to her, and she said, "The one that you stripped down is worthless." And I was really shocked
Mm.
because she has no military experience at all. And she said, "I understand what you're saying in your military one, and I've never served. We just have to clarify some of the stuff, but mostly I get it. You're like,
Yeah.
carrier arresting and arrestments and landings. I get what that means." I was like, so I sort of assumed like the civilian world is clueless and stuff.
Yeah.
It's not true. But she went through it line by line and said, "Okay, what does this mean?" And she said, "Explain this to me." And I was like, "Well, we have this." And she's like, "Okay, say that." And it was, how do you? It was essentially crafting the bullet so that it told the
Mhm.
story. You got this award. What's that award for? Like, that's one of the things I learned from her. It says, we got the Tactical Electronic Squadron Excellence of the Year award for being the best at blank. I'd left out the for being the best at, but it's like,
Mhm.
define what the award criteria is. What is the award for?
Yeah.
And so she just had me go through, and she asked me for each one of those bullets. Well, she's like, "Okay, that one makes sense. I get it. Next, this one, I don't really know what that means. Can you explain it a little bit more?" And I would tell her. She goes, "Yeah, put that down." And we iterated many times, and I just kept updating it. And then I would let her know that, "Hey, I sent my resume to a buddy, and he doesn't like this." And she's like, "Okay, let's play with that." And sometimes she's like, "Yeah, you're right. I like this better." So she wasn't like,
Yeah.
no, didn't have ego about the, she was happy to see it, evolve, and my resume just was always evolving. I think every person that saw it gave me something that made it better. I mean,
Awesome.
I changed that thing constantly. LinkedIn, she helped me with. She gave me a lot of great advice on creating my LinkedIn profile. Basically, her recommendation was take the first 2 to 3 sentences of your job description, get rid of the bullets that are on your resume, and put that in your LinkedIn for the job. So don't go into as much detail. Her advice was if they want the detail, they'll see it in your resume.
Mhm.
So I basically took the most important bullet to explain each job I've had,
Mhm.
and maybe one bullet, and simplified it, and that seemed to work. She was very. She gave me a lot of networking tips, like I was looking at Raytheon, it was a major
Mhm.
contractor. She said, "All right, well, let's take a look." And then she saw, hey, she just did. She said, for each company, it often has like a veteran hiring page or a veteran hiring news story or something.
Mhm.
So we went to the veteran page of Raytheon, and it had a profile on their presidents for missile, who was a backseater in aircraft. She goes, "You and him have something in common." So I found his name and I reached out to him on LinkedIn, and I actually had a conversation with him, and it was very productive. It turned out that, he needed people in Arizona, which was not a good fit for my family. But, you know, she taught me to do that, well, do the research, find out who's at that company that has something in common with you that you can just pick up, the phone, eventually ask for a conversation and just talk to them, and some of that stuff seems so obvious, but I didn't think of that. She
Yeah.
she she told me to think about that, to realize that there's probably like a veteran hiring subspecialty office within HR of a lot of companies
Yeah.
that you can just have a conversation with, and oftentimes I'd reach out to them and they would say, well, you should talk to this veteran, and it would just make the connections. So um,
A lot of
yeah,
times
I
that
mean,
we're on the ground level of our own job search, right? So when you
yeah,
have a mentor like Elizabeth, she's got the 35,000-foot view, and she'll say, I've been there. They say something, you're like, oh, and then you get mad at yourself for a second. You're like, how did I not think about that? But you're fighting through the weeds, like you're
yeah.
digging through the swamp, through the
Yeah,
muck,
you're
right?
you know
Yeah,
you're macheting your way
yeah,
through this path that you've
yeah.
never been through before, and
And they're
and
like, hey, dummy, look,
yeah, so
look for something you have in common. You're like, oh, I get it. I get it now. So, okay, so well, let's talk about the ACP real quick.
okay,
Chris, I'll pull the website up. I'm a big believer with an instructor background of just kind of showing people. I want, if anyone's tuning in, I want them to be able to see the actual website. So, you're going to the correct website, because the internet's a sketchy place. I don't know if anyone's ever seen the Dave Chappelle skit for the internet, but it's still true. Like 15, 20 years later. But this is the American Corporate Partners website, the ACP, and this is the lead page. Like most pages, they have some numbers and what's going on, but you specifically use the mentoring program, correct?
I did, yeah. I reached out for that, and then I was contacted for a phone discussion with a person, and what they do is they listen to you, they listen to your goals and what you want to do, and then they will say, hey, we'll get back to you with a proposed mentor, and then they contact you and say, okay, we believe we found a good mentor for you. This is her profile, this is what her experience is in, this is why we think she'd be helpful. And then you could say, no thanks, I'd like somebody else, or whatever, it's up to you. But then I agreed to meet with her, and then, like I said, that first discussion, I was like, whoa, this lady's intense, she's very
Yeah.
direct, you know but I said, you know what, we're going to go with this. We're going to push, and it turned out to be a really great decision. While you're doing that, so the program does want you to be committed, and then they're
Yeah.
not like strict, but they ask you to do. I can't recall if it was 1 or 2 mentorship sessions per month, which
Okay.
was totally workable, whatever
Yeah.
the schedule was. And then the person that paired you with the mentor will follow up with you and your mentor. So she basically would email us both monthly and go, hey, just checking in on you guys. How's it going? And because I'm kind of type A and I was very motivated, I usually didn't wait for my mentor to reply to her. I would give the update. I'd say, hey, thanks for checking in. This is what Elizabeth and I did this month. This is what we talked about. And this is what we're doing. And these are some of the good things I've tried. And then I would CC, Elizabeth in it, and basically give that answer. And I don't know if I was supposed to do that or if Elizabeth's supposed to answer that. She asked us both how
Mhm.
it's going. So I was excited. And so I replied back, but it's neat. They don't just sort of leave you alone with your mentor. They follow up every month and just see how the mentorship is going. And we always had something that, we were always taking another step. We were always, okay, and we seem to get this, your LinkedIn profile is looking good. Let's look at something else. And so there was always
all kinds of cool stuff in here. The mentorship goals, they talk about resume review and interview prep, career exploration, and understanding job opportunities. I mean, that's a loaded statement, but it's true, right? Understanding job opportunities, because I tell people all the time, like if you were, like say you were a torpedo, they used to be called torpedosmen,
Yep.
like I mean, maybe if you get out as an E5 after your first tour, there's not a whole lot of jobs for people that were torpedo mates or whatever. You know what I mean? Career advancement once a position is obtained, work-life balance. I see that's good too. Networking, small business development, leadership, and professional communication. Then they have, like you said right there, the program guidelines, the pairing process, all this stuff. This is pretty awesome. I'm not going to like go into super detail on the website for you, because I'd rather it be you doing your discussion. But next week's episode, I'm going to do a thorough breakdown of this mentoring program, just showing the website, showing what's available there. I saw some veteran spouse programs. I think that's great. I mean, did they ever mention to you if it'd be possible, like if you and your spouse were like you were transitioning, or that they could help them with the mentor program too, or something? Is that how it works?
I think they can give mentors, because I mean, for my spouse, and she's had a hard time keeping up a career, but she's basically created her own business, but it's not easy for a 2 to 3 year PCS cycle for a spouse. So we didn't look into that, because Cheryl was like, hey, I'm going to figure it out when we get there. And so she's reestablished here. So I don't know, but yeah, it sounds like they're willing to help veteran spouses too, which is awesome, because they definitely.
I'll look into it and do a deep dive. I might actually reach out to someone from there and see if I can get some. I know sometimes they have their own marketing information, which gives you a little more clarity on stuff. But hey, do you want to plug your wife's business? It's my podcast.
No.
I was going to say you can if you want to.
Yeah, she's a makeup artist, and she does weddings. She's done movies. She did a Netflix show. She's a professional makeup artist and is super good. And she's getting, she's had to reestablish her client base over and over. But she's terrific.
I feel glad that part of my Netflix subscription is going to your family. So,
well, I think she got paid a flat fee. So trust me, there's no residuals on it. It's actually a documentary about a son that killed his dad or something like that, like abusive, like he was kidnapped by his father. And it's really interesting, but she did the makeup for the, I think it was his mother or something. It was really neat though. She did a movie in Hawaii when we lived in Hawaii, like a small film. Like I love it. She's done commercials, like casino,
that sounds cool,
television commercials and stuff. It's really neat.
I got a buddy of mine. He's a retired senior chief. His mom is a card carrying member of like the transportation people for movies and television shows. And she basically what's that biker show on AMC?
Sons of Anarchy.
She worked Sons of Anarchy the whole time.
Oh, cool.
And so like they would give all kinds of free swag. And then one time they gave everybody hoodies, and they could order like an additional hoodie for a family member. So she got him like the sun. It looks like the motorcycle jacket, but it's a hoodie. And the thing is, he rides bikes and stuff. Yeah. Like that's, I would tell everybody, if you ever want to find a job when you get out of the military, go work in Hollywood, because you just get all kinds of free stuff, like free food, free stuff everywhere.
Yeah, if you can afford to live in California, I suppose.
I'm from there originally, and I'm never going back. It's just too expensive and too many people. But I digress. We're getting off course. So I try to keep these about an hour long. We're coming up an hour. So is there any little last nugget about the ACP you'd like to get out? Because I got some more specific questions about your transition, but like anything specific about the ACP that you would like anyone watching to know?
Well, I just think for them, like it's purely like out of goodness, they're not making any profit from connecting, everything they did for me, they just did because Elizabeth volunteered to be a mentor and wanted to help somebody out. So, I think sometimes people will wonder, like, what's their motivation? What do they get out of it? It's like, hey, in this case, like, I think this is the real deal. And I'm super grateful that I used them. I think that those skills that they go through, I didn't use the small business one. That's not a path I was interested in, but man, the resume, the LinkedIn, the networking, the interviewing, the compensation stuff was all just awesome.
Yeah, that compensation thing is
That was really
humongous.
helpful. Yep. I learned
Humongous.
things in 1 hour that I'd never heard of before and didn't encounter since. Like that was the only place where I found that. So
Yeah.
that was super helpful.
So Chris, during this whole thing, did you run across a book or a podcast or anything, like any kind of media material that really helped you? Um, was there anything you found like that, or?
No, I didn't. I was recommended some and tried some, and but I didn't find any like aha, the briefcase from Pulp Fiction moment or anything
Yeah.
like that. So no, I think it was just the outreach to actual individual people was what really helped me out. And I think for me, like one of the little um, little like techniques or whatever that helped
Mhm.
me through things was getting organized. When I felt the pressure of time and that lease expiring and everything, I got a little calendar book at Office Max and a couple like different color markers and just with off the computer and off the phone, just on paper,
Yeah.
spreading it out and just being able to put appointments and I'd had a notebook where I'd put, this is the company, this is the rec number, this is the title, this is when I applied, whatever, just
Yeah.
to be organized. And did it really help me being organized? I don't know. But psychologically, when you're
Yeah.
feeling like you're not in control
Yeah.
of your life and you're feeling very insecure and very have full of doubt and fear to like it just feels like you're grabbing the reins a little bit, and to me that was really a good thing to do.
Yeah. Well, that's a great tip, and I'm a firm believer in that too. Like, you gotta find a process for yourself that helps you organize your thoughts, that helps you keep you on shows you accomplishment, shows you knocking stuff out, right? Because if you had 10 interviews down and 5 of them you got a call back, and 3 of them you have a salary negotiation going on or something like that, right? That shows you it's tangible in front of your face, and it's not spread out throughout the internet. You can look at it and say, okay, I actually have done something, and I'm not
Yeah.
just twiddling my thumbs waiting for someone to get back. That's huge. And well, I don't think I had. Was there any question I didn't ask you that you would want me to ask? And if so, how would you answer it?
Oh yeah, well I think it's really like what the best tools are. You
Yeah.
mentioned books and podcasts, but for
Yeah.
me LinkedIn has been amazing.
Oh, nice.
I mean, I think it is kind of the default place now, but yeah, the thing is I like to do there is a couple things. Like first, it is cool that you can search for jobs. Like you could just put like aviation program management or something like that. Like
Mhm.
then you can filter it by location, and then you can find then you find the list of jobs, right? And then you see all these company names that you'd never heard of, and you click the company page, see where they're located, you see what they do, and you're like, oh, that company is interesting. Then you can click for jobs and see what jobs are available, and then click people and see people you can reach out to, and then if you apply for one of those jobs you found there, you can connect to one of the people you found there and go, hey, do you have a chance to talk? I've just applied for this job. And sometimes people are like, well, hey, use me as a reference in the job. You can do an employee referral. So like there's all these different connections that
Yeah.
you end up building up, and sometimes it's stuff that you don't see. Like some of the people that you will see it, like you interview and then suddenly you see that person searched your profile,
Yeah.
and I follow this
Mm.
because I'm into space. I follow Payload's page. They're like a
Uh-huh.
newsletter,
Yeah.
and there's an article every day. And for a while, it was always a company I'd never heard of. So I would click, Terran Orbital just launched this capstone satellite. Who's Terran
Oh,
Orbital?
wow.
Look them up, and then connect to the people. And so like through this newsletter, I was exploring the space, pun
Yeah.
intended, of the space sector. And so just finding this one newsletter like opened up all these doors to like what's really going on in this sector, and
Yeah.
then all these companies. And then I'd find most of them are in Colorado or Los Angeles, but sometimes they're in Florida. And I was like, oh yes, and so like just all that research, like the whole world opens up, and it's all through, for me, was all through LinkedIn
Yeah.
and the different tools it has. So I thought that was really awesome.
It's kind of like an open source intelligence tool.
Yeah,
It
it's
really
like the
is.
Wikipedia of job
Yeah.
searching,
Yeah.
but
Once you
accurate.
clean it up and you get all the crud out of there, like, because
The
like,
political stuff, and yeah.
yeah, because for me, like, I try to, and I agree with you totally, Chris. Like LinkedIn, it's insane. Because like the one things I ever post really if a job pops up, if someone in my network's got an opportunity somewhere, that's really all I repost those things and be like, put a couple keywords in there with the hashtag so people know about it. I have some buddies that are always looking for work. So if I see something I think lines up with them, I'll just forward it to them. And that's always good. But yeah, it's gotten a lot better as far as usability and stuff like that. There's free training on there. And this podcast is not sponsored by LinkedIn, but LinkedIn by all means, if you want to sponsor the podcast, all you gotta do is reach out to me, DM me on LinkedIn. We can have a discussion. But
let's go.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to add. So hey, real quick, so Chris, my podcast is a weird amalgamation of watch enthusiasm and veteran resources. If you want to talk about having a niche forum, that's my niche. I was wondering if you wanted to do a wrist check, if you had anything on, and what you have on, and tell people home.
All right, so I did get a retirement Grail. I'm not wearing it right now, but I've really got to get better at camera management. But
yeah, they're hard.
This is it's a no longer Meg, I don't think, but it's a Butler chronograph. It's an affordable quartz. Unlike a lot of awful chronographs today, it doesn't have a tiny little 60-minute register. It's a 30-minute register, so you can actually read it. Oh, nice. And I flew with this a lot because I like watches, and especially older style. So I didn't want to just fly with a digital, but we do have certain emergencies, especially transitioning to the growler where you want to hack a stopwatch. And in the back seat of a Prowler or in the front right of a Prowler, I'd have mechanical stopwatches in the dash, but we no longer have those when I upgraded to the growler. So I just really wanted to have it. So I wore this in my whole EA-18G growler syllabus. I wore it as an air boss in the tower. I wore it on my Blue Angels flight that I got to do as nice. The CO of the base. And it's just, it's kind of cool. It's all business. And I like tool watches that are all business. I have my Grail for my retirement present to myself was an IWC Mark 11 tribute. Yes. That to me, the Mark 11 is one of the most beautiful, simple watch designs ever made. So thanks to my wife, she let me spend a pretty penny on that one.
Well, here you go, Chris. This is your open invitation. Your open invitation. Every Saturday morning we could do it there, or anytime you just want to do an interview about watches. I'm going to have the weirdest YouTube channel in the history of the world. I'll do the best I can in titles to make sure people understand this one's about like veteran resources. This is about watches. Yeah. I don't want someone to tune in and be like, I'm trying to learn about this freaking pilot watch and learn about job stuff. But so I'm wearing, I'll give you the first look.
Oh yeah.
My Grand Seiko SBGX 335.
Oh, congrats.
The 9F. I just got it. It's my first luxury piece, but it's the Grand Seiko quartz movement. And man, the science behind this thing is so sweet. I'm not going to go on and on about it now, but 4 o'clock crown. It's just, and that whole Zaratsu polishing thing, like you got to see it to believe it. But this thing is tool-tastic.
Heck yeah. And I'm glad it's a super quartz. I'm a quartz lover, much love.
Yeah. Quartz with no date. Yeah. That's like, I don't know. That's like finding a pot of gold underneath a rainbow and a winning lottery ticket at the same time. It's like the best of both worlds. But, yeah, well, Chris, I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate a little bit of watch talk at the end. I want to give it to people. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for all the knowledge you've passed on, because I really feel like when it comes to this military to civilian transition thing, there's a whole lot of stuff that people can't get out of a book or out of a pamphlet or out of, they need to hear some real humanization of what the transition's like. I want to be able to present that for people across the board, all pay grades, all warfare areas, quote unquote, all branches, because I feel like it's something that we all have in common. And if the information gets out there more, like stories like yours can help, they can't hurt. They can only help going on. So I just want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to chatting to you again.
All right, brother. Sounds awesome.
Well, thanks for everyone for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. Chris, you got any last nuggets?
No, I'm going to accept your invitation, though, to do a watch-specific show. So I'm excited about it.
Let's go. And everyone, remember, at watchrolling.com, you make the watch. The watch doesn't make you.